Well, good afternoon. I'm John Levy. It's my distinct honor, particularly in its 50th year, to serve as the 10th chair of the Board of Directors of the nation's Legal Services Corporation. And on behalf of our outstanding OSC board, thank you for spending part of 2024's bonus day at this special Take a Leap for Justice Symposium. I do want to thank the MacArthur Foundation for generously supporting this program and Northwestern's Pritzker School of Law for making this terrific auditorium available today. As this is my home city, I need to say thank you to so many of you here who I've leaned on, from joining our Leaders Council and Emerging Leaders Council, serving on task forces and initiatives, and part of a host committee for today, and of course my law firm, Sidley Austin, that has been with me the entire way. And what an extraordinary group of distinguished state and local leaders we have speaking here today, including our Governor, J.B. Pritzker, MacArthur Foundation Board of Directors Chair and LSC's former Vice Chair, Martha Minow, Illinois Supreme Court Chief Justice Mary Jane Tice, Chief Judge of the United States District Court for the Northern District, Rebecca Pallmeyer, the President of the American Bar Association, Chicago, and Mary Smith, the President of the American Law Institute in its 100th year, my brother, David Levy, and of course, our host, Ari Osofsky, Dean of Northwestern Pritzker School of Law, will welcome us at the reception. Senator Dick Durbin, Congressman Darren LaHood, and Los Angeles Chargers head coach Jim Harbaugh join us today by video. Our program also features 4 wonderful panels. The executive directors from LSC's outstanding Illinois grantees, covering our entire state, Legal Aid Chicago, Land of Lincoln Legal Aid, and Prairie State Legal Services. They're here with us to discuss their organization's continued efforts to close the justice gap for low-income Illinoisans. With profound thanks to LSC's Leader Council member, Mike Lafrano, Chicago Cubs Executive Vice President, we have a panel of executives from Chicago's sports organizations, including the Cubs, White Sox, Bulls, Fire, and Blackhawks, who will discuss their views on access to justice, and business leaders from Paladin, Mondelez International, the Commercial Club of Chicago, and Joseph P. Kennedy Enterprises will join us in a panel discussion on the role of the corporate sector. Finally, the distinguished deans from all of the law schools in Chicago will discuss the development and impact of the legal aid clinics at their schools and their efforts to encourage the next generation of lawyers to be engaged with and do what they can to help narrow the nation's justice gap. Over the last decade, as our LSC board has recognized the gravity of the crisis in access to justice as it exists for low-income Americans, we wanted to make sure that this 50th anniversary year called attention to the crisis. And with the help of private support, we're developing an outreach campaign, Protecting the Promise. During this anniversary period, LSC will seek to raise greater awareness of the importance of access to justice, the gravity of the crisis for low-income Americans, help to support our stakeholders across the country, and educate and recruit new voices from many sectors of our society to advocate for civil legal aid. This effort will particularly focus on the country's persistent failure to make equal access to justice in our civil justice system a reality for so many Americans. LSC's Justice Gap report, its most recent, which the University of Chicago's NORC helped to develop, quantifies this failure and sums up the dire situation. Low-income Americans do not receive any or enough legal help for 92% of their substantial civil legal problems. And here in Illinois, statistics show that only 7% of low-income residents receive adequate legal assistance. The significance of leaving these low-income Americans to fend for themselves is illustrated in matters involving potential eviction, which currently represent on average 40% of the cases handled by our grantees across the country. And LSC statistics alarmingly show that when those individuals or families have a trained representative, they receive a favorable outcome 90% of the time, while those on their own, sadly, are evicted in 90% of such matters. We cannot continue to kid ourselves, folks. The serious chronic underfunding of LSC and its grantees all across the country is helping to fuel this crisis in civil legal aid. LSC's extraordinary network of 131 grantees with more than 900 offices across our country employing over 10,000 lawyers, paraprofessionals are stretching their limited resources to cover as many individuals and families as they possibly can, but the statistics and studies confirm they just have to turn away so many qualified individuals because of a lack of resources. So, as grateful as we are that Congress last year increased LSC's funding to $560 million, clearly much more is needed to close the justice gap after years of wholly inadequate resourcing. Just think about this. 30 years ago, 1994, Congress appropriated $400 million for LSC. So you can see over the past 3 decades, our appropriation, which goes to support direct field services, has increased only modestly, not remotely enough to keep up with the demand. Well, I'm sure that LSC's founders would be very proud of the work of our grantees, but I think it is fair to say they would be dismayed at the lack of appropriate funding. To remedy this, LSC's bipartisan board unanimously last March requested Congress increase our budget to $1.5 billion. In today's program, we will discuss the significance of this justice gap for low-income Americans, which, in my view, threatens both our justice system and the rule of law. That truth was articulated to an ABA audience nearly 60 years ago when the then director of the Office of Economic Opportunity, Sergeant Shriver, longtime head of Chicago's Merchandise Mart, addressed the ABA's annual meeting in Chicago in 1965, and I quote him, "The extension of legal services to the poor is only a means of a more universal end, one we both share, the establishment of the rule of law." He said, adding, "It is that ordered quest for dignity, for justice, and for opportunity, which is the central concern of society today." Well, a year before that, Shriver's brother-in-law and the father of one of our presenters today, then Attorney General Robert Kennedy, gave a Law Day speech at the University of Chicago Law School. Now, you're going to have to, some of you know this, but many of you don't. You have to forgive me a personal moment. I was in high school at that time, and you can imagine how annoyed I was at my parents that I was not invited up to hear Attorney General Kennedy, but they said, well, space is tight and it's for the law students. Well, around 7 o'clock that evening, our house phone rang. There were no cell phones back then. And it was Bobby Kennedy, for me, inviting me to come up and hear him speak if I could get there in 10 minutes. I said, well, Attorney General Kennedy, I'm too young to drive, and we live too far from the law school, so I can't get up there. He said, well, don't worry, I'm just staying down the block from you, so when the talk is over, come down and meet me. And I met him that evening, and here we are 60 years later, and his son, Chris, joins us today in this program. And in his powerful words that day, Kennedy called for lawyers to provide more legal assistance for the poor, noting that, and I quote him, each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and those ripples build a current wave which can sweep down the mightiest walls. Well, 10 years later, the ripple Bobby Kennedy described in his remarks became the wave, known as the Legal Services Corporation. And for 5 decades, it has joined with many of you in working so hard to sweep away many barriers to equal access to justice for low-income Americans. And as we recognize LSC's 50th anniversary, we, all of us, need to redouble our commitment and our efforts to protect the promise of equal justice in America and live up to the closing words of our Pledge of Allegiance by making justice for all a lived reality in our land. Thank you very much.